Well, hello there, and welcome to another edition of Warbird Wednesday. My name is Fred Bell. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Palm Springs Air Museum. Now, we told you we were going to do X-planes, but we have a little bit of a thing that started over in the Ukraine, and we are actually getting a ton of questions about the ghost of Kiev. And so we have stopped. We're going to cover a couple of aircraft that are actually being used by the Ukrainians in that conflict. We'll get back to X-planes in more than enough time to do the F-117, the opening of the F-117 hangar. We're going to come back to that. But we're going to today cover the concept of the ghost of Kiev and the MiG-29, the Fulcrum. Now, the reason we're going to do that is because the ghost is supposed to be a MiG-29 pilot. This, for me, is rather awkward in that when I kind of learned all my stuff when I was younger, these are Warsaw Pact and Soviet Union folks. And it is extremely odd for me to have Soviet equipment and now Russian equipment versus former Russian equipment. So both sides are using the same stuff. It is really surreal. But we're going to cover it today. We're going to cover it in depth and whether or not the ghost could be real and the type of equipment that they're using over there, this MiG-29, and we'll have a conversation. Now, Greg has, I don't know, Greg, a plastic IKEA hat. Where do you even get this stuff? This is pretty interesting. Actually, you know, I mean, this is not bad if you were fishing or something like that, but definitely not something that I would have in my wardrobe. My Termagant assistant, is my Termagant assistant close enough? All right, so I'm going to take this thing off. I got my hair cut, Greg, which was exciting. Oh, look at that, wafting it to the Kenny, two-hand catch. So we are going to talk about the MiG-29 today. Now, the MiG-29 is it is a very, very common fighter in use with the former, as I said, Warsaw Pact, Russian allies. It made by MIG. It is very common. It is a fourth generation aircraft. It was first flown in 1977. I believe it goes back that far, and it's introduced in 1982. To me, it just doesn't seem like the airplane was introduced that long ago, but it was. Now, I'm going to go ahead and throw up a plan view. Greg can throw up a plan view. We're going to do our traditional stuff. I'll give you the other side too so you can see the weapon stores. The Russians and the Soviet Union, this is make no mistake about it, this is a Soviet Union engineered aircraft that is a product of the Cold War. The Russians have always had a very robust aircraft industry, tremendous aircraft industry. And they were known for really nimble, excellent designs. They are relatively simple as compared to Western aircraft, especially aircraft built by the United States. They are simple in technology. I'm going to explain why that is. They're durable, and when I say durable, the Russians, remember, they have a big expanse, areas that they have to defend. These airplanes are in all kinds of different weather conditions, all kinds of different airfield types, and they're maintained by some folks that we're going to talk about. So the thought process with the Russians is a little bit different. The other thing about especially the Soviet Union, and not so much about Russian Federation, because the folks that are in the Ukraine right now are that's Mother Russia. That's the Russian Federation. But the Soviets' doctrine was you build a whole bunch of these guys, and if war comes, you outnumber. It doesn't matter. American philosophy was we're going to get 10-to-1 kills. The Russians said, fine, you can get 10-to-1 kills. We'll have 20-to-1 advantage. So in armor and everything that the Soviets did at that time in Soviet doctrine, they wanted overwhelming force. Now, why is that? That goes all the way back to World War II. The Russians in the Great Patriotic War, they lost 20 million people. The Russian psyche, they're naturally paranoid from that, which they should be. It was a terrible war. And from a military doctrine, they just made a decision that they were going to have an overwhelming amount of military hardware, and that was going to keep them safe, keep them out of a war. Ultimately, in history standpoint, and you can argue with me in the comment section if you want, that bankrupted their country. They just simply could not keep up with the United States. I think the GDP, just to give you an example, of Russia today is $1 trillion. The GDP of the gross domestic product of the United States is $20 trillion. I may be off a little bit, but you could see the difference in the size of the economies. The Soviet Union basically built itself out of existence. Now, the Soviets had client states in front of them, which were called the Warsaw Pact allies. And that was Poland, it was East Germany, it was Romania. Guess what was in there? Ukraine. We're going to talk about a little bit about that. Although the Ukrainians were viewed as part of Russia, they never really viewed themselves like that. You can go back historically and look at the Ukrainians. We're not the History Channel, so we're not going to cover that. But these folks were all arrayed against NATO, which is what these fighter forces were. So this MiG, initially, the MiG-29 was developed along the same thought process as the Americans had. Remember, we talked, and you go back in an episode, we talked about it, Boyd and the Fighter Mafia. Boyd and the Fighter Mafia basically had come up with the F-15 and the F-16 on the wing design and the design of the airplane, where they felt that they had the optimum amount of energy management, in other words, the thrust to rate ratio on the airplane to maximize their performance. The Russians went down that same path. This aircraft replaced the MiG-23. Now think about the MiG-23 for a second, more like an F-14-ish kind of, not exactly like an F-14, but big hulking. They had messed around with variable wing airplanes, the F-14, the F-111. They had decided that they did not want to go on with variable wing aircraft, variable geometry aircraft, because of, and we discussed this in other airplanes, the amount of maintenance. The airframe required so much maintenance that it didn't make any sense. So the Russians issued a very similar request for aircraft. They came out with two airplanes, the MiG-29, which was, and they say a lightweight fighter. I'm going to talk about this fighter. It's not very lightweight. And then the other one was the Su, the Su-27. So, and the Su-27 was comparable to the F-15. So they had two fighters very similar to the F-16 and the F-15. The F-15 is the heavyweight. The F-16 is the lightweight tactical fighter. The balance on these fighters was about the same in that they wanted the lightweight fighter to be about 30% of their fighter force, and that's the role they went down. This aircraft, in terms of a performance envelope, is comparable to an F-16 or an F-18. It is constantly being upgraded, and we're going to talk about that. But the older MiG-29s are very comparable to some of the fourth-generation aircraft that we have flying today, the F-16, the F-18. Maybe a little bit different with some of the upgrades. The controls, this is not a fly-by-wire airplane. You know how we talk about F-16 is fly-by-wire, and most of the American aircraft in the later fourth generation are fly-by-wire. So the aircraft has hydraulic controls, which is again, just a throwback to the simplicity. When I talk about maintenance on these aircraft, and this is to this day, these aircraft can be deployed in very rough fields. You can close these inlets, and the aircraft can breathe off the top. So this can, when we talk about FOD, foreign object debris, FODing out an engine, when you talk about that term, you're sucking stuff in here that gets into the fans of these jet engines. The Russians have thought about this, and these aircraft can operate off rough fields. We're going to talk about why that's important in a moment. So the airplane was designed to be dispersed. It could be dispersed to these remote airfields. The Russians figured that in the, again, Soviet Union doctrine, we're going to nuke most of their major airfields, or in a nuclear war, they're going to lose a lot of their airfields. So they could flush their bombers and their fighters, especially their nuclear bombers and fighters, to these remote airfields that they could be operated on. Now, what's the big deal about the Russian maintenance? Greg, you're looking at me. You're looking at me. Most of it's conscript. So these are conscript maintainers. They're not professional maintainers. That means that the skill level to maintain the airplane, I'm not dissing you if you're a Russian crew chief, okay? But the Russian skill level on the maintenance in the field is markedly lower than the skill level that maintains an F-16 or an F-18 or an F-35 or whatever. Now, we're going to talk about this in comparison to fifth generation airplanes in a minute. But the maintainers, so the airplane is very simplistic. We're also going to explain why that's important. Remember, hydraulic controls, you've dumbed it down. The airplane is primarily all aluminum. There are not a lot of composite materials on the aircraft. What does that mean? More weight, but it doesn't have a lot of composite on it, like a lot of the fifth generation aircraft or late fourth generation American aircraft. Range on the aircraft on a variable mode is about 1,000, 1,100 miles. When I say ferry, that means that this pilot is not at military power. What's military power? That's where all the gas comes out the back in those afterburners. So if this pilot without external stores, and in the case we're going to talk about now, no ability to tank, there's no ability to tank, although the pilot's going to be flying from relatively, Ukraine's not a huge country, but he's going to be flying close to airfields. You got to think that really the airplane has about 900 miles range. So 900 miles range in combat, not very much at all. Maybe in a combat area, 15, 20 minutes if he's at full afterburner, and he's got to have fuel to get back. Okay, so you can't just run your tanks dry and hope you're going to glide home. You may be able to get away with that once, but you're going to get your butt shot off if you do it more than once. So the aircraft has relatively short legs. There's no tanking capability with the Ukrainian Air Force that I know of. Maybe you can correct me in the comments and I don't know something, but I don't think they have that kind of aerial refueling. Now, the aircraft, and Greg, I'm going to get a snicker out of you. This has a HOTAS or a HOTAS flight control system, and that's hands-on throttle and stick. So that means that the pilot can adjust the throttle on the stick of the aircraft, so they're not doing the old Top Gun move, you know, well, hold on, goose, I'm going to do this and fly right by. The pilot has a lot more control and the ability to manipulate the power on the airplane with one hand. That's basically what that means. Now, the other thing about the airplane that is interesting is these aircraft have a reticle right there. The best thing I'd describe it, like a little ball. What that ball goes to is in the helmet of the pilot, there's a reticle or a thing that goes over the pilot's eyepiece or his screen, and he can basically, this is called off-bore sighting. So he can look off. In the old days, if your guy was here and you were here, you had to get behind the MIG or the US fighter, for it to be fair today, and you had to get that radar sweeping right in front of you. It would give you a growl or some form of tone. If it was a radar-guided missile, the radar-guided would guide into the target. If it was a heat-seeking missile, the heat-seeking missile would pick up the plume of the opposing airplane and go up its tailpipe. But this allows you with your weapon systems, and I'm not going to get too far into missiles today, but to look off-bore about 45 degrees and then lock up the target, select the target, and you don't necessarily have to point the airplane at the other guy to fire. It had 3 stores pylons under the wings, and those could carry 8 AA-10 Alamo missiles or AA-11 Archer missiles, both infrared and radar-guided missiles. So very similar weapons package to what our aircraft carried. Or carry. So let's talk about the Ghost of Kiev. Supposedly, the Ghost of Kiev got a series of kills on a wide range of Russian aircraft, all the way up to some of their really top line stuff in the first days of the war. And you know, in the World War II, we had ace in a day that would happen, like in Marianas Turkey Shoot, you know, in the Pacific and places like that. You had a really target-rich environment, and you had a very low skill set. The Japanese, as an example, or the Germans in some particular situations, had very low skill sets that they were up against, so they were able to go in and just tear these guys up. You had some of those fighter sweeps in England where they got really well, especially against German aircraft late war, where the Germans had no training, and you're getting behind a guy that's got 2 hours in the airplane, and pretty much he's a dead man. But supposedly this guy, whoever the Ghost was, got 6 kills in one day. How realistic is that? Well, there are always boogeymen adversary pilots, right? And the Germans had them, the Americans had them, the Japanese, throughout history. You go back to World War I, look at the Red Baron as an example. You know, the pilots that would just terrorize the other side if they knew that that pilot was in theater. It has gotten less so in modern times because the weapons are so lethal. The Russians are operating S-300, S-400, and some older weapon anti-aircraft systems in theater. These missiles are super lethal. We're going to talk about that a little bit. On top of that, the Ukrainians of all types, have about 125 airplanes. The Russians, I don't know how many aircraft they have in theater, but they outnumber them by a factor of 10, you know, at least in everything. So now that means that if how could the Ghost be real? For one thing, if the Russians, which it clearly looks like they did, they underestimated the Ukrainians, and we're going to talk about that. It's possible that as they came in, they didn't tell their pilots, by the way, these guys they're going to be out for blood. They're going to be coming for you. So it could be possible that the Russian pilots in a whole variety of aircraft got a little bit of surprised, okay? Russian pilots, because they've been fighting in Syria and some other places, are really skilled pilots. They are no slouch. They understand how to deliver weapon systems. They operate, some have been flying in Syria. That's a really tough neighborhood. You got the Israelis, you got other people over there. They understand what adversary aircraft are. And I've heard stories from our pilots that have been deployed over in that neck of the woods about encounters with the Russians. Are no slouch. So you can't just figure that the Russians aren't very bright. But if the Ghost got up, and if he was in a really target-rich environment, he might have been able to get that many kills. Now, other things, other factors. What did I talk about? Fuel. Didn't have a lot of gas. So if he gets up there, all those different type of aircraft would have had to present themselves in a relatively short order for him to do that if he did it in one day, which is supposedly he did. Secondly, you would have to figure that the Russians aren't adjusting at all at this point, their air defense or anything else, for him to be able to operate. Now, the Ukrainians aren't stupid. Their president played a kind of a cool game saying the Russians aren't going to invade. I would bet dollars to donuts that the Ukrainians flushed what I talked about, their aircraft and dispersed aircraft and anti-aircraft systems throughout the country. in places that the Russians either aren't going to look or wouldn't necessarily see them. You got to remember the Russians have satellites, they got eye in the sky. I'm sure they've got AWACS, electronic surveillance. As soon as one of these airplanes comes up and they're starting to they're sniffing, remember, they know the airplane. So they're sniffing for the electronics on this aircraft to figure out what it is and where it is. They know the equipment. So they're going to be looking for these airplanes. And it maybe a guy gets a surprise, then they're really going to be looking for this guy. So it's possible that the Ukrainians were able to flush their aircraft. Going back to my comments about Warsaw Pact, there have got to be a lot of post Cold War facilities in the Ukraine that were hardened and that were designed to survive the World War III that the Soviets thought they were going to fight. Ukrainians have a lot of that equipment, I'm sure, in those sites. So hardened bunkers, things of that nature. Could they have dispersed their Air Force? Absolutely. Do they have enough fuel? Who knows? Do they have enough of those understore weapons? Don't know. Those are the factors that would run into this. Now, air defense, real quick. The Soviets with their air defense, I go back to the Soviet doctrine and then we'll talk about the Russians. The Soviets and the Serbs are very important because I'm going to talk about a little bit about the Serbs. The Soviet Union learned when we started coming up with electronic countermeasures and things of that nature, and we started Wild Weasel and chasing SAM sites, that what they would do is they would turn their radar on, their viewfinder, at a very low frequency, and they would only do it a couple of times because the American, because that was their primary adversary, couldn't lock onto that signal. So they would turn it on, sweep, right, and turn it off. So I would bet that the reason that the Ukrainian air defense systems are still going is this is a common tactic. The Warsaw Pact, these commanders that were trained that are in Serbia, especially missile battery commanders, probably know a lot of these tactics. In Serbia, when they got the F-117 with an SA-3, there were two things. There were no electronic countermeasure aircraft with those F-117s, so they couldn't screen them, they couldn't jam. The other thing was the Serbians did exactly what I just said. Although the Serbian battlefield commander, he couldn't get a lock on the F-117s, and he turned it on the third time real quick. He broke his own orders, and that's when he got a lock and shot down that F-117. It is entirely possible that the Ukrainians do have defense systems that they've flushed, and that they're doing exactly what I said. They're moving them around, and they're being very, very careful how they use them because the Russians are looking for all that stuff. Now, people say, I've had people send me pictures of destroyed MIGs and destroyed air defense. Great. You got to give the enemy something to shoot at because you don't want the guys to know that you've flushed all your equipment. So you leave your hangar queens and you leave the equipment that doesn't work out in the open for something to shoot at somebody. It's a good chance, and some of the pictures that I looked at, the way the stuff was laid out, it makes absolutely no sense. And to me, it looked like the Ukrainians were basically saying, here's satellite, Russian satellite, or Russian intelligence. I've got airplanes sitting around and equipment, and these MiGs that they did get were hangar queens or inoperational. Remember, you may have 125 airplanes. We talked about it before. Not everything works. And I would sure the Ukrainians don't have enough parts and equipment to keep everything in the air. So that is the kind of the quick look at the state of the battlefield in Ukraine. Do I think the ghost exists? It's possible. We all want to believe in a hero like that, especially when you have a David and Goliath story like this. I mean, this is something that this is as old as time as far as warfare goes, where you want to believe that you've got that hero on the battlefield. It goes almost back to Hector, you know, and ancient times with the 300 Spartans holding off the Persians, right, at Thermopylae. You want to believe in stuff like this. There was a Ukrainian pilot, Colonel Alexander Osenchenko, who is the Gray Wolf, that's what he was called, that was killed a couple of days ago. There are folks that think he was a European airshow pilot, did a lot of air shows. People knew him. He was a very skilled pilot. There's a lot of people that think that he may have been the ghost of Kiev. If he is, he's paid the ultimate sacrifice for his country. I'd like to think the ghost is still out there. Alexander was a very skilled airshow pilot, knew the airplane really well, knew incredible low-speed handling. I mean, he would have been somebody that would have had the kind of skills to keep the aircraft down low, stay out of Russian missile battery range, and take advantage of get up there and knife fighting with some of those Russian aircraft. He's going to be recognized by his country, but he lost his life a couple of days ago. With the loss of Alexander, I want to salute him. And today, Greg has gotten something, Empire Spruce Beer. Now, Empire, I know where you're going with that, with the Russians. So there you go. 100, there it is, 100% cane sugar. These guys got the marketing memo. Bottled since 1930. Doesn't even give you a daily value on the sugar. So we're going to go ahead and pop this. It's still a little cold, Greg. Go ahead, get that off. So what I want to do is to the Ukrainian Air Force and to the Gray Wolf, I salute you. I took a lot of swig of that. I have no idea what that is. It tastes like cleaning fluid. Oh my goodness, that is absolutely awful. I don't know what spruce beer is, but I'm going to take one for the team. Ghost of Kiev, get up there. Good hunting, my friend. I'm going to take one more, but wow. Greg, that was a little sip because the first one, you may have to call poison control. So on the modern battlefield, I covered a lot of information today. On the modern battlefield, unfortunately, heroics can be short-lived. The weapon systems are so lethal, and we all want to believe in these heroes, and we want to see the Ukrainians defend their country, and we hope that they do, and we hope that the ghost is up there still running around. Now, we're going to go with this is a new product. This is a kid's shirt. This is a new product. It's either a kid's shirt or one that I wear to really terrorize you, isn't it, Greg? Yeah, like a midriff type shirt. Yeah, that image is not even something I think Greg has run screaming from the building. But we have this. If you want to reach out to Jason, we have kid shirts. I think that's a P-51 sitting on there. Very nice airplane. And it's on the image is on the front. So if you want, reach out to Jason and get him to send you one of these really, really cool kids shirts. Now, you know, I'm standing in front of the Cold War timeline in the Miles hangar, which houses all of our Cold War jets. A lot of Cold Warriors live in this hangar. Of course, this is the Ken Miles hangar. This hangar was built 100% with donations. We cannot do what we do here without your donation. So click on that link below and give us a few shekels to help us build the next hangar. We're continuing to add aircraft and space, and we can surely use your donation. Also, if you came across us on YouTube, this is a little bit more involved than I normally do, only because the topic is so relevant. We're going to do one more on an aircraft that's in theater next week. If you like this and you like aviation, we only do military aviation. Send us to a friend, subscribe, give us a like on Facebook. If you have a comment, if you think I'm off base, which people don't hesitate, Greg. I get some interesting comments now and again. Leave us a comment. I'll respond back to you. and we can have a conversation about whatever particular aircraft that we're talking about. My name is Fred Bell. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Palm Springs Air Museum. Have a great day.